The next thing we want to talk about concerning variables and measurement are challenges with finding observable data or measuring data values. So we'll look at a couple of examples in this video just to illustrate that it's not quite as, not because this process of defining and observing variables is not as cut and dry as it may seem. So the first example, how do we measure crime rates? So the units are usually crimes per 100,000 people. So how do we know how many homicides there were per 100,000 people? Well, it kind of depends on how we measure that, right? And this is where the challenge comes in. Do we measure arrests? Well, how many are arrested and end up not even being charged, much less, not being convicted or guilty of a crime? All right, arrests is a very weak measure. How about convictions? That seems like it should be pretty decent. But on the one hand, how many convictions are overturned? Maybe somebody was wrongly convicted. On the flip side, what about somebody that actually committed the crime but was acquitted for lack of sufficient evidence? So, and finally, what about crimes reported? Well, a lot of crimes go unreported, and sometimes somebody reports a crime, a crime didn't necessarily happen. So there's a lot of challenges with measuring crime rates. Another example where things are difficult are invisible populations. For example, how many homeless are there in the county? I was talking with some folks about trying to do a needs assessment in the area, the 4-county area served by the homeless shelter where I'm treasurer. And one of the questions is, how many homeless do we have in these 4 counties? That's extremely difficult to measure because how do you find homeless folks? You want to go searching under bridges? What about homeless folks who throw a backpack on and hang out on Ferris's campus? It's an invisible population, and it's difficult and possibly invasive to simply measure measure the number of folks who are homeless. The best you can do there is look at who is getting served by what community resources, including the homeless shelter, food pantries, and so on. Human trafficking victims. That's difficult because human trafficking often goes unreported. So there's a lot of invisible human trafficking victims. What about genocide? Some people have been arguing that the way the Chinese government has treated the Uyghur population in the northwestern province of Xinjiang amounts to genocide, where they've been arresting and putting folks in camps without trial. But where is that data going to come from? Certainly not from the Chinese government. They're not going to say, hey, we're committing genocide. Here's how many here's what we've been doing, and here's all our data. At best, maybe there are some cases filed with a watchdog organization. My sister's missing, my cousin's missing, but often that's going to go unreported. That's another challenge. Right? So I hope you appreciate that some variables are difficult to define and to measure carefully. So what do you do in those situations? Well, you get the data you can, and when you report it, you're very careful to define exactly what you're reporting and acknowledge limitations. For example, if you've got 431 homicide convictions per 100,000 people in a given state, then instead of saying the homicide rate is blah, you say we've approximated the homicide rate with convictions, and in this state there were 431 homicide convictions in the last year per 100,000 people. In the next video, we're going to talk about how do you use observable data to process that data and come up with the values for a variable that you might be interested in.